Perhaps the most important thing to understand about loneliness is that it is a powerfully constructed illusion. Meaning it takes a great deal of collaboration on a number of different levels to create and then sustain the illusion that we are separate, that we are valueless, that we are not wanted, that we are not loved, that we are disconnected. And so, in order to understand loneliness, we have to see how it comes about. Well, it begins in the intersection of infancy and a parentally illiterate culture. So in a highly competent, parentally literate culture, parents understand the basic of parenting. Avoiding trauma, secure attachment, empathy, what adult love looks like. Loving enough to care, caring enough to take time, taking enough time to see, seeing enough to understand, understanding enough to empathize, empathizing enough to attune, attuning enough to facilitate the competent, secure fulfillment of human needs, survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, the development of talent, the bringing of that talent valuably and abundantly into the world, and the participation in something bigger than ourselves. When we succeed at that, we do not feel lonely. Loneliness is a construct that fills in the gap when that doesn't occur. And the construct gets built, first of all, by the internalization of the cultural and parental inadequacies on the part of the child. In other words, the way child psychology works is that it is overwhelming and thus traumatic for a child to look out at their parents and culture and say, these idiots don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't understand the most basic thing about me, about what's important in life. They don't understand psychology. I'm being raised by highly incompetent people upon which I am completely dependent. This is a horrifying truth to grasp for any child. And so they create an alternate truth. And the alternate or substitute truth is that my parents are perfect, the world is perfect, but I'm in a lot of pain. And the reason I'm in a lot of pain is not because my parents are sociopathic, parentally illiterate, addicts, etc. The reason I'm in a lot of pain is because I deserve to be hurt. Because there's nothing wrong with my parents. I need them. I depend on them to survive. And so I've got to believe in what I depend on. So what I'm going to do is, typically with the strong collusion of the parents, is I'm going to make myself into the scapegoat. I'm going to take the hit so that my parents can feel better about themselves, and so that I can feel more hopeful that they're not going to entirely mess up my life. And with the idea, with the lie, that there's nothing wrong with the parents, there's nothing wrong with the cult, but there's something wrong with me, we internalize the dysfunction of the cult. We internalize the dysfunction of the parent. We do this by copying. The child is an unconditional yes to language, to mannerisms, to gender roles, all defined by the parent, all defined by the cult. We take it all in unconditionally. We start doing it pre-verbally, just watching the nuances of facial expressions. We learn very clearly through the tightening and the expansion of the grown-ups around us what is welcome and what is not welcome. And having decided that whatever upsets mom and dad, whatever upsets the cult is bad, and entering into an asymmetrical cult. For example, the chauvinism of our cult goes far below gender. It is the elevation of everything yang or masculine and the diminishment of everything feminine or yin in every man or woman. It's so insane that as a man or a woman, the most enjoyable part of your day may be looking at the beauty, at the laughter, at the grace of something feminine in a man or a woman. It's the best part of your entire day. And somehow, through blackmail and brainwashing and sheer stupidity, the cult is able to convince you that that's just froth. You know, that beautiful woman who made you smile, oh, that's just a woman. That's just feminine. What really matters is a piece of paper, how much money on the bottom line of this or that. What really matters is whether your salary was $68,000 or $82,000. That's what matters. You may not feel anything at all in felt human experience around looking at that number. But the cult has brainwashed the thought that says that's important, that may not affect your life at all. But this thing that makes you incredibly happy, it's just feminine. It's just a little light entertainment. Well, you see the chauvinism right there. Who said that light entertainment is to be dismissed? It's a self-referential loop. It's valueless because it's feminine, and it's feminine, and therefore it's valueless. And that's it. There's no underlying science that says that being serious and making a lot of money cutting down trees and selling paper or whatever the enterprise is somehow more intelligent than bliss, joy, grace, a moment of beauty, a moment of contact. There's no science underlying that. If anything, the ecological science says spend less time at work, spend more time contemplating elements of the reality that are beautiful. Be more in presence, listen more, dominate less. But the cult says you got to be dominant or you're not important. The cult says. And the child internalizes its cult. Now, in order to internalize the chauvinism of the cult, the child must become ashamed of everything feminine inside of them. their feelings, their fluidity, their spontaneity, their exuberance, their joy, their attachment, their need, their care for people in pain, their empathy, their ability to listen, their trust in other people. All of these things are low-ranked taboo activity in a chauvinistic cult. Through countless teasing and sociopathic bullying, a little boy has to dissociate from the feminine inside every man and every woman, and learn first to treat his own femininity with contempt, and then treat women who are feminine with equal contempt. You see, the brain is rational. It's too crazy for a human brain to say, the parts of me that are feminine are worthless, but the parts in you that are feminine are valuable. It's like saying, the gold that I have has no value, but the gold that you have that's identical has lots of value. It's like, which is it? Is gold valuable or not? Okay, it's selling for $300 an ounce. I've got 10 ounces, that's worth $300. You've got 10 ounces, that's worth... It's worth the same. You cannot train men to treat their own femininity with contempt and then treat the same men to treat women femininity with reverie. You can't do it. Now, the core chemistry of the psyche is the polarity between yin and yang, masculine and feminine, yes and no, up and down, hot and cold, black and white. The self is the synergy, the unique synergy of these two polar energies. Now, if you denigrate, shame, abuse, humiliate, treat with contempt half of who you are, it creates loneliness. It creates pain, separation from and longing for what? Half of who you are. It creates pain on both sides of the severing of the wound. Because the feminine that has been cut in the distinction between feminine and masculine feels the loneliness of being cast out, of being given the shame of the psyche, of the cult. So the feminine feels pain. Now, the masculine also feels pain because it's treating its counterpart with contempt and is banishing the chauvinistic male, and the chauvinistic female will banish their own femininity and act as if it doesn't exist in order to gain rank in a chauvinistic cult. When you banish half of who you are, you feel like half of you is missing because you've banished it. So you have the isolation on both sides. If you take a couple, and one side banishes the other side into the basement, into the unconscious, to be denied with contempt, both parts of the couple are alone. They're both isolated. They're isolated through the veil of lies. You see, lies create separation. If I say that this hand doesn't exist, and I believe that, I've got to dissociate from reality in order to hold on to the belief that is dissociating me from reality. So you have the lie that is the basis of chauvinism, and it's a very basic lie. The lie of chauvinism consists of saying that if you take a whole, a planet, a circle, a sphere, a human being, and you cut the whole in half, you take the earth and you cut it in half. The lie of chauvinism says that this half of the earth is more or less valuable than the other half, when in fact they function ecologically, and neither is able to exist in the same state or anywhere close to the well-being. I mean, if we cut this planet in half, it would do tremendous ecological damage to all species on both halves. The whole orbit would change, the gravitation, the weather would change, the halves may or may not bang into each other, creating tremendous earthquakes. You know, if to the degree that the spinning of the planet continues, it would be an incredibly wonky and volatile spin. The atmosphere is ruptured. I mean, we'd probably all be dead if you take the human body and cut it in half and say this half is better than the other half. There's no science that supports that. It's pure cult dogma. It's pure bigotry, stupidity. It's utter nonsense. And yet, as a completely innocent child, this bullshit is rammed down every boy and girl's throat. First through facial expressions, then with innuendo, then with punishments and rewards, then with teasing and ostracization in school, then with the entire media network. And regardless of the balance between men and women, which in many ways has been improving. 100 years ago, there was a big debate in the United States about whether or not it was worth the paper for women to vote. Because clearly, a good woman would vote exactly like her husband voted. Because a good woman would be smart enough to understand that her husband was more intelligent than she was, and that it was her duty to support her husband. And so all that would happen if women voted, assuming women were good women, was that it would take twice as many ballots to create an identical result in the election. And if women were bad, and despite having inferior brains, voted their own ideas, it would be even worse than wasting paper, because you'd have the less intelligent sex influencing important things like the election. This conversation was going on 100 years ago, just a couple generations. Well, we would now call that barbaric. Of course, women have the right to vote. But would we want an emotional woman, a feminine woman? I mean, fine, if you want dried, stale, dead Margaret Thatcher without a single ounce of empathy, if you want a highly masculinized, dissociative, sociopathic woman, meaning a woman who's more masculine than most men, oh, fine, she can run a country. But we can't have a feminine woman run the country. She might care about the children, heaven forbid. She might cut defense spending and ensure that all of our homeless, including the 2.5 million juveniles, would have a place to stay. Meaning 2.5 million, or 1 in 50 children under the age of 15 are so traumatized at home, they run away without the legal ability to get a job, get a passport, this, that, the other. Meaning their homes are so fucked up that they'd rather leave free rent and food just to get away from their parents. Now, a woman might, or a feminine man who had empathy, might actually look into this. And that might be bad for the stock market. Well, heaven forbid that the stock market has a little bit of a dip. Let's give that pain to our children. Let's protect the stock market and sacrifice our children. So our predominant form of chauvinism today is to shame and derank feminine men and women, but allow that as long as a woman can compete on masculine terms equally, despite her different body type, that fine, she can have a place at the table. We have a cult riddled with chauvinism. And we have innocent children imbibing that Kool-Aid every single day with no psychological capacity to discern this. And then we have a cult in denial, so that by the time they have reason, the cult is busy brainwashing them that no. There's no chauvinism here. Healing chauvinism is not about the equal right of women to kill people efficiently in the military. It's about paying a living wage to mothers and fathers who take care of their own children and take time off work to perform the single most vital role the cult has available to be played. The parent. Whoever is the parent, either the man leaning on his feminine side or the mother leaning on her feminine side, to competently raise a child is the future of the cult, of the country. It's the only role we don't pay. We punish people's careers who take time off to raise a child. That's chauvinism. When you cut half of yourself off and try and bury it, that part is lonely because it's cast out, and the part that remains is lonely because it's missing half of itself. You've got loneliness right there. Materialism creates loneliness. When you say that there's no meaning, that anything that cannot be proven in a test tube, I mean, what arrogance, what faith these scientists put forth. We can't prove that the entirety of all that is fits into a test tube. We just believe it with certain faith. We can't prove that God got us all that is, doesn't exist, but we have faith. We've decided on faith that the default is guilty unless proven innocent. Meaning that if you have a spirituality, a belief in something more than yourself, you are guilty of being ignorant because you don't share our faith in a test tube. There couldn't possibly be either, or there couldn't possibly be both and. That we believe what is proved in the test tube and we believe in the humility to acknowledge that the multiverse is never, thank God, going to fit into the limitation of a dogmatic, materialist bigot who is so arrogant that if the entirety of existence does not fit into their little box, into their little mind, into their little language, that they are certain it couldn't possibly exist and that no rational person could allow for such an existence. The biggest joke of all in this domain is, of course, the hypocrisy of the dogmatic scientist who will tell you that consciousness is an accident, that consciousness is an illusion, that free will is an illusion, and that you should use your consciousness and your freedom and your free will and your money to buy his book about how your consciousness and your freedom doesn't exist. Fuck 'em. If it doesn't exist and the consciousness doesn't mean anything, shut the fuck up and stop writing papers with your delusional, non-existent, unfree fucking mind. Now, it creates loneliness to go crazy. Meaning, when your parents tell you violence is bad and they're going to hit you if you don't agree with them, they are insane. You be nice to your sister or go to your room. That's insane. Now, the question is, will the parent hold the insanity? Or will they give it to their child? Now, when parents are so idiotic that they don't realize they're idiotic, the David Dunning competency research, the incompetent person who cannot grasp that they're incompetent because they're too incompetent to know the difference between competency and incompetence. when that insanity is given to the child, whose ear is ringing from being hit for not being nice enough, that's loneliness. Because the parent is saying, I'm a schizophrenic, but I'm right. And we don't get to talk about that. You get hit, you get a mixed message, because my words say that I'm hitting you for this reason, but they also say that being mean is bad. And now I'm in pain because you're being mean to me. You've just created a complete mindfuck for that child. And they're alone, banished in their room with half a self, trying to figure out what other part of themselves they have to get rid of in order to be tolerated in a fucked up cult that is so fucked up it doesn't have the decency to explain where it's fucked up. Would you mind going crazy and then go further crazy by pretending that we're sane? You see, every time you create these veils between reality and the stated reality, you create separation. When I call you up because I want a loan of money, and I say, no, I'm just calling to hear how you're doing. You say, do you want a loan? No. I just really miss you. And then, oh, would you mind just giving me another couple of $100? So, you called me for money. That's the only reason you call me. Then you lied about it. Then you get righteous because I'm pointing out the truth. Then you prove me right, but pretend you were right. And you're just in it to get a little money. Well, every one of those lies increases the gap between us. And that gap of lies is loneliness. Every single time a parent, a teacher, an authority, a government figure does something that is insane and then pretends that it's sane, there's a gap between you. There's a lie between you and them. And our cult builds lies, and the way it builds lies is with dominance. And children are incredibly transparent, naive, open, and Dad, you said drinking is bad. Why are you drinking? Well, that's perfectly intelligent. The question is, why is Dad doing something he says is bad? It's obviously good, or he wouldn't be doing it. What's going on here? Well, when Mother says, don't talk to your father like that, and looks with panic because her father hits the mother for pointing out the obvious side, the child has to decide whether to abandon the truth in order to protect his mother's feelings, who he depends on, and to go a little bit crazy so that his mother feels better, or stay sane and terrify his mother. That's a no-win situation. It's a horrible situation to put a child into. You're either going to make your mother miserable and stay sane, or you're going to go insane You're going to make your mother miserable and stay sane, or you're going to go insane and she's going to be happy. Well, who do you depend on? Well, at that stage in development, you depend on the mother. And so you want a happy mother. If you have to give up sanity, so be it. You don't need your sanity as much as you need a happy mother when you're small. The big one is going to keep you alive. Now, the price takes its toll over the rest of a lifetime. When you grow up and you need your sanity and you're completely crazy and have guilt-tripping mothers and fathers that have fits and tantrums at every effort to try and overturn this mountain of debt, this mountain of lies. And again, you really want me to live my entire life crazy so that you don't have to admit to your stupidity? Yeah, that's what we want. Do you realize that if I live my life as crazy as you are, I cannot be happy? Yes, but we will be a little bit more happy. We're not happy either, but we'll be a little bit more happy if you don't point out our stupidity. And besides, we never really did care about your happiness. What we don't want is to feel any of our anxiety. And we feel a lot of anxiety because we're carrying all the fucked up stupidity of our parents. And we don't want to deal with that either, because it'd be too responsible, too empowering, be too upsetting to take responsibility for our own lives. So please do stay crazy. You can pass it on to your children. And don't make us uncomfortable. If you do, we'll use all your brainwashing and Christian programming and stuff to say that you're ungrateful and not being positive and all the stuff, just to make sure you don't question the status quo. So this is how the child descends into loneliness. You also have the loneliness of violation, of trauma, because the reptilian brain maintains the illusion that we're all separate. I'm me, you're you, we have nothing to do with each other. That's why we're sociopaths. The empath says we do have something to do with one another. We are connected as a species, as part of a larger ecology. Therefore, your feelings matter. Your body matters. You see, when you're hit, particularly by a giant, and every grown-up is a giant when you're 5 years old, when you're hit by a giant, the message is reptilian. The message is sociopathic. The message is, even though I'm a giant, which means that if there is any threat, I'm it, I'm going to put me first. I'm not happy with what you're doing, so I'm going to hit you so that I feel better. And then I'll feel even better telling you that this is for your benefit. I don't enjoy hitting you. I have to, for your own good. I'm communicating that you don't matter. I'm communicating that your body and your well-being does not concern me as much as my own feelings. I'm communicating that we're separate. We don't really belong together because I don't hit myself when I do the same things that I hit you for doing. I treat you worse than myself, acknowledging that we're separate. I abuse my power because I can get away with it and it doesn't traumatize me to hit you. It traumatizes you, but you see, you're separate. So you have the split of chauvinism. You have the split of dogmatic materialism that completely ignores human feelings, needs, is equally chauvinistic, and it's ignoring. I mean, you try and study something like happiness. You can read the biography of Martin Seligman, who brought in some of the focus on positive psychology. Completely downplayed because he's dealing, if he'd studied pain in rats just to increase weaponry, he would, with his intelligence, have risen in ranks at Harvard and Princeton. But because he's studying something feminine, inner, feminine, emotional, feminine, positive, he's denied funding, given the cold shoulder, looked down on for doing the most intelligent thing in the entire psychological community, to actually study happiness rather than just depression and misery. So when you're punished for doing something intelligent, when you're punished for pursuing the truth, when half of who you are is summarily dismissed as low rank simply for existing with zero science and rationale to back it up, when the club of money, science, and power is used to batter half of the psyche, when you go through education with a message of worthlessness that is so thick that we're going to pretend that studying algebra is really important for your future. I mean, just ask yourself, have you ever used algebra once in your entire life? Other than those fucking tests at school? I asked my math teacher at 14 when I left. I said, I've already learned the basics, arithmetic, adding and subtracting, division, multiplication. I'm looking around at me and the world in general, at my parents, my world, my community, most of the jobs out there. I said, when have you used calculus, algebra? When have you used that in your daily life? The math teacher said to teach you. Said I couldn't have gotten a math teaching job if I didn't know those things. I said, so you're taking hundreds of hours of my time that could be spent starting a business, learning sales, effective communication, learning to drive a car, learning to build a house, learning to invest. You're taking up all that time just in case I feel like being a math teacher like you. And you're not teaching me a single hour of emotional literacy. Not just you. I can go cradle to grave through every institution in this cult and learn zero science-based knowledge about feelings. Zero. In fact, I will be misinformed through shame and chauvinism and stupidity all around me. And feelings are things every single person uses 24/7 for the rest of their lives. Feelings, zero training. Algebra, hundreds of hours. This is sheer stupidity. But it gets worse. If you question the dogmatic stupidity of your cult, you are punished. Like I had a teacher erupt in rage and humiliate me in front of the whole class. Why? Because I asked a line of questions that revealed his stupidity, not because I was trying to make him look bad, but because I didn't understand why we were doing this instead of this. And obviously there was no good answer. So the response is to rage at the student. This is a symptom of emotional illiteracy. A symptom of emotional literacy that is so destructive that it prevents questioning the stupidity about willful emotional illiteracy. Meaning it is profoundly cruel to be willfully ignorant about psychology and feelings. Which means it's profoundly stupid to stonewall all inquiry in that domain out of fear of looking stupid that you only have because you are emotionally illiterate. So you have an emotionally illiterate teacher abandoning their duty to teach out of fear of their own feelings, which is created by their own emotional illiteracy. And a child is asked to believe that they did something horribly wrong to bring that to the attention to the class, rather than that the cult, the teachers, and generations of teachers before them have done something terribly wrong to the cult and the student to willfully ignore emotional literacy in the face of overwhelming scientific data that the world would be a much better place if it contained adults who were emotionally literate. Now, every single time you are bullied, corralled, brainwashed, manipulated into a position that is cruel, stupid, sociopathic, ignorant, insane, and filled with lies, you're being put off in a room somewhere that doesn't really exist, so that other people who have been put off in that same level of insanity can stay insane in their isolation, and the migration of loneliness continues. There is no loneliness. You can put half of the psyche into a shame-filled bag and punish it, but it's a complete lie. Your feminine side is and always will be exactly as valuable as your masculine side. You can copy the fear and the lies of your cult, but they are lies and fear based on lies. It's profoundly idiotic. And as soon as those lies are challenged with a little bit of evidence, the cult collapses, goes up in smoke. And what do you have? You have togetherness. You have data that connects people rather than maintaining these lies. You can believe the dogmatic, materialist, reductionist rationalism that says that if you can't measure it in a test tube, it doesn't exist, and thus banish large portions of the psyche, large regions of consciousness, and pretend they don't exist as a way of creating the illusion of isolation. But as soon as you open up to actually see and feel, that illusion falls away. You can take the chauvinistic, dogmatic, and egotistical point of view that I am me, an independent person in the universe, separate from everyone else and everything else. I am an individual and I am separate. Except it is a lie. Racism is a lie. I think all the races have been tracked down to about 5 original people. It's a complete and utter lie. If we were all relatives at one point and diverged and expressed our uniqueness in various ways, nature is a program that has created more and more complex and successful life out of nothing for 20 billion years. The genetic evolution of human beings is part of that program. For you to say, in the sheer arrogance of your stupidity, that nature made a mistake, that turning some people's skin black and some people's skin brown and some people's skin white and some people, that nature made a mistake, that the program that started with nothing and created an entire universe out of nothing. Give it a shot if you're so much smarter than nature. Create a whole universe out of nothing. I'd like to see it. When you can create a universe out of nothing and 20 billion years of successful evolution, giving rise to 1 billion planets that we know of so far suitable for life, with more than 1 billion distinct life forms on this planet alone. And you can explain how you did it better than that. Then you can explain how one race of people generated out of that program is a mistake. Or you can have the humility to understand there may be a plan in nature's algorithm that demands diversity, or she wouldn't have created it in the first place. Now, until this little fingernail is able to replicate the whole body sustainably for several generations, I'm not that interested in whether my fingernail thinks I should get rid of my liver. Who said a fingernail is supposed to be intelligent enough to grasp that paradigm, let alone make a better recommendation than the whole body? bigotry, sexism, racism, every form of ridiculous hierarchy in which this type of person is presumed innately better than another is playing arrogance with nature, or if you want to say it, with God. The creator, the program that led to all this, thought it was a good idea to have different races. Thought it was a good idea to have different cultures. But you know better with all of 50 years on the planet. It's absolutely ridiculous. And it creates the illusion of loneliness. Creates the illusion that there's no place, because there's no place in the fear-based, timid mind of people who hate complexity, who hate being present to their own ignorance and the unknown. Furthermore, we are not distinct individuals, isolated from all that is. If you want to prove your independence, then cut off your connection with the trees. It's very simple. You just plug your nose, block your mouth, and watch how independent you are over the next hour. If you get that one down, you live an hour without breathing, brilliant. You manage that. Now go a month without eating. Now go a month without drinking. Now go a month without any space. Just, you're independent. Separate yourself from space. And how about time? You're separate, right? You don't need food, you don't need air, you don't need space, you don't need time, you don't need liquid. Now try thinking without language. Where did you get that language? You get it from your independence? Or did you get it from other people and the program in nature that produced people capable of language and capable of teaching it to you? And how about that body of yours? Independent, isn't it? Why don't you go back before you were born and create the body out of nothing, like nature did with the Big Bang? Just Big Bang yourself into existence. It's complete nonsense. There isn't a single thing about us or our lives that doesn't have a million connections directly or indirectly with absolutely everything. Gravity connects every single particle in the universe. How are you disconnected? You've got particles in you. Are they affected by gravity? Okay, you're connected via gravity. How about electricity? You got electricity in your brain? There's electricity all over the place. You're not that distinct. You got 99% of your genes from apes. You're not that distinct over there either. You're not distinct from other races. How about the present moment, like you just came out of nowhere? No, you came out of millions of generations of humanoids. And before that, through the entire evolutionary process. What do you mean you're not connected? If one step of that evolutionary process didn't exist, there was never any fish, you don't exist. You're dependent on fish. You're dependent on reptiles. The reptilian brain, a remnant from crocodiles. No reptiles, no reptilian brain, no you. You're connected to everything throughout all time. The future is different because of you. The past is different because of you. The present is different because of you. There is not a single facet of your life that is not interconnected on multiple dimensions with millions of other things, and indirectly to everything. The cult goes ahead and pretends you're disconnected, and you take the Kool-Aid in and believe it, and suddenly you're massively lonely. The loneliness is culturally induced ignorance, shame, incompetence, trauma, fear of pain, and a complete negation of rationality and the science. So the real pain is coexisting in a cult ecology that makes loneliness real, based on ignorance and fear. And in order to belong to that cult, you have to attune to the cult, because the cult is too fragile to be challenged with the unknown. Cults are always very fragile. They're terrified of falling apart because they're so flimsy. So they counteract that fear by attacking anyone who isn't normal. But unfortunately, in order to be normal, you have to abide by the dogmas of the cult, which are just chock full of lies that create one illusion of separation after another and punish you for challenging that. So it is very sad, and loneliness is a real experience in the context of those lies. But when the veil of lies is lifted, you will find that you have been, are, and always will be connected to all that is. That the entirety of the possibility field that we exist in would collapse without you. That's the math. Meaning, if you do the math that generates a possibility field, and you take one part of the possibility field which you are in, you exist in a possibility field and a probability field and an actuality field. If you take one part of the possibility field and remove it, the entire geometry of the entire possibility field collapses. It doesn't work anymore. You can't get the total if you delete one of the numbers in the equation. Without you, nothing exists. Nothing. You're part of the equation. And you cannot have a probable until it is possible. So if you take you out of the possible, the entire possibility field has to shrink dramatically. Otherwise, you're possible. And you have to be possible before you're probable, and you have to be probable before you're actual. You have enormous impact. And whatever you decide and don't decide has impact and affects millions of people over time on a number of dimensions because you change the equation. We are not alone. We do not exist without nature. We are a part of nature. We are part of life. We do not exist without one another. We are a part of one another, and we, as a species, are part of nature. It is a masterful delusion to get vast numbers of human beings in the context of such interconnectedness to buy into the delusion that they are separate from that which they couldn't get away from if they tried. And so really what we can say is that the cultured mind becomes separate from itself as a part of becoming cultured, because chauvinism is innate in the cult. Meaning it's innate in our cult. It's not innate in all cultures, but you cannot become part of this cult without learning chauvinism, to allow it, tolerate it, etc. So having entered the delusion of the cult, we become separate from ourselves, and there is an experience of loss, separation, loneliness, and the pain of that. And that pain is not comforted because we're split in half. And in that split mind, looking through the lies of that mind, we appear separate from everything. We appear alone. It is a painful, miserable delusion. It's not real, but it is real to the cultured mind. Good luck in restoring your sanity, tearing up the contract, uncovering and releasing the lies, and coming back to wholeness.